Think about ancient Rome for a second. For pretty much any woman, the rules were strict. You couldn't vote, you couldn't really own property, you couldn't even show up in court without a man representing you. You were always under someone's control. And yet, walking right through the heart of the Roman Forum was a small group of women who could pardon a man on his way to his execution, who controlled huge fortunes, and who had bodyguards carrying the symbols of state power. They weren't empresses or queens. They were the Vestal virgins. And their story, well, it shows us a massive contradiction right at the center of Roman society.
You know, when you hear Vestal virgins, one image probably comes to mind, right? Punishment. This terrifying, dramatic story of what happens when you break a vow. But that's the thing. That one story hides a much bigger, way more complicated, and honestly way more powerful reality. So today we're going to peel back that myth and take a look at the real lives of Rome's most exceptional women.
So, let's get it out of the way. Buried alive for breaking their vow of celibacy? Yes, the stories are absolutely true. It's the one thing everybody seems to know about them. But what if I told you that this one sensational, horrifying detail is actually the least interesting thing about the Vestals, and that by focusing on it, we completely miss the point of who they were and the incredible power they held?
Just look at this comparison. It's night and day. On one side, you have literally almost every other woman in Rome living under what was called potestas, the total legal authority of her father or husband. But on the other side, you've got a Vestal, legally independent, a major property owner, and wielding authority that no other woman could even imagine. This wasn't a minor difference in status. This was a completely different universe, legally speaking.
Right. So how on earth was this possible? What made these 6 women so fundamentally different from millions of others? Well, their power wasn't just some informal, symbolic thing. It was hard-coded into Roman law, creating this unique category of person that basically existed outside the normal rules of society.
It all comes down to this one crucial legal concept, sui juris. It means of one's own law. The second a young girl was chosen to be a Vestal, she was legally cut off from her father's authority. Poof, gone. No husband, no male guardian, no one had any legal control over her. She was, in the eyes of the law, her own person. Full stop. This one status was the key that unlocked everything else.
And the perks that came with this status? Whoa. We're talking the right to own and control huge estates. They could write their own wills, something other women couldn't do if their father was still alive. But look at this one. They were accompanied by lictors, carrying the fasces. Now those weren't just bodyguards. The fasces, that bundle of rods with an axe, was the ultimate symbol of Roman state power, the power to command and even execute. And if a Vestal just happened to cross paths with a condemned prisoner, he was immediately pardoned. That's not just privilege, that is real, tangible power.
And this wasn't some 2-year gig. It was a 30-year commitment, and it started when they were just little kids. The whole thing was perfectly structured. 10 years learning the ropes, 10 years doing the job, and then a final 10 years teaching the next generation. It was a system built for continuity, one that helped the institution last for over 1,000 years.
So with all the strict vows and the long service, you're probably picturing a pretty grim, isolated life, right? Kind of like a nun in a cloister, maybe. Yeah, you'd be totally wrong. Let's talk about where they lived, because their address tells a very, very different story.
This was home, the house of the Vestals. And you need to get that image of a simple convent right out of your head. We're talking a palace, seriously. Archaeology shows the Atrium Vestae was this huge, luxurious complex right in the middle of the Roman Forum. It had private multi-story apartments with painted walls, beautiful gardens, marble fountains, even its own private bathhouse. This was some of the most desirable real estate in the city and a life of serious luxury.
Their duties were this amazing blend of the sacred and, well, the totally practical. Their number one job, of course, was tending the sacred flame of Vesta, which was seen as the literal life force of Rome. If it went out, disaster. But they were also really sharp businesswomen, managing their properties and finances, and they were the most trusted people in the city. If you were an emperor and you needed to keep your will or a secret treaty safe, you didn't give it to your advisors, you gave it to the Vestals.
And don't think for a second they were hidden away. These women were A-listers. They had the best seats in the house reserved for them at the Colosseum, right up there with the emperor's family. They were at all the fancy dinners, they hung out with Rome's elite, and their advice was actually sought on important state matters. They were at the very center of political and social life in Rome.
Okay, so powerful, wealthy, respected, living in a palace. How do we square that with being buried alive? It just doesn't add up, right? Well, the answer, it turns out, has very little to do with religion and everything to do with politics.
Take a look at this number. This is our best guess for how many Vestals were actually truly executed for breaking their vows.
Now, let's put that into perspective, because 20 doesn't mean much on its own. We're talking about an institution that lasted for over a millennium. So 20 executions, that averages out to maybe one every 50 or 60 years. The point is, this was an incredibly rare event. It wasn't the defining part of being a Vestal. It was the most extreme, rare exception.
And when you look at when these executions happened, a pattern just jumps right out at you. It's not random. They happened when Rome was in deep, deep trouble. During the Second Punic War, when Hannibal was practically at the gates, 2 Vestals were executed. During a period of massive political chaos in the late Republic, 3 more. When the Emperor Domitian felt insecure and needed to look like a strong moral leader, he went after the chief Vestal herself. They weren't sinners, they were scapegoats.
As the great historian Mary Beard puts it, these executions were basically religious crisis management. When things were going wrong, you're losing a war, the state is unstable, blaming a Vestal was a way for the leaders to say, see, the gods are angry because of her moral failure, not because we're doing a bad job. It was a political move, plain and simple, just dressed up in religious robes.
And even the punishment itself tells you how special they were. It was a huge taboo to shed a Vestal's blood. They were sacred, so they couldn't just be executed like a common criminal. Instead, they were sealed in a little underground room with a lamp and some food and water and just left. Even at the moment of their punishment, their untouchable status created this unique, hands-off method.
So why did Rome create this weird, contradictory institution in the first place? Why give this tiny group of women so much power while denying it to everyone else? Well, the answer gets at the very core of how Romans thought about order and society.
The key idea here is something called liminality. It just means being in between. Vestals didn't fit into any of Rome's normal social boxes. Think about it. They were women, but they had the legal rights of a man. They were virgins for life, but they were also seen as the symbolic mothers of the entire Roman state, tending its family hearth.
Honestly, the best way to think about it is that the Vestals were a hack in the Roman social system. Because they didn't fit into any normal category, the normal rules just didn't apply to them. That in-between status, their liminality, that was the very source of their power. It let them operate in a space that was completely outside the normal restrictions of gender.
And maybe the most telling detail of all is what happened after their 30 years were up. They were free to go. They could get married, have a family, live a normal life. But guess what? The overwhelming majority of them chose not to. They stayed in the house of the Vestals for the rest of their lives. I mean, why would you trade total legal independence, wealth, and public prestige to go live under the control of a husband? Their choice says everything.
And this wasn't some historical fad. This institution lasted for over 1,000 years. Think about that. From the early kings, through the entire Roman Republic, and all the way through the Roman Empire. The sacred fire was only put out in 394 CE, not because the Vestals failed, but because a Christian emperor ordered it shut down to make way for the new state religion.
And that brings us to the final, really tricky question. The Vestals prove that it was possible for women in Rome to be powerful and independent. But is creating an exception for a tiny, elite group challenge the rules for everyone else? Or does it actually reinforce those rules by making power seem like a rare privilege, not a right? It's a paradox at the heart of their story, and one that's still worth thinking about today.